Chicago Imagism is a late 1960s art movement that emerged from artists associated with the Art Institute of Chicago, who drew influences from surrealism, outsider art, and popular culture. Chicago Imagism has earned its place in art history by standing out from the iconic pop art of its time and by treading its own path as a whimsical and open-ended form of artistic expression.
Well, you'd be talking about the second half of the 1960s. And so turbulent times in the country, a lot of unrest going on, and a lot of redefining of roles and customs or aspects of society. Also, too, in the art world, pop art was coming into some popularity or some recognition as being kind of an effective summary statement for the climate of the time period. The way we typically understand it, the pop art coming from New York, they were thinking of art as something of a product, something that you could buy, something that captured the popular culture feel, but also captured this kind of consumer vibe. Now, Chicago Imagism also embraced images drawn from popular culture and certainly had a lot of pop references in the work. I think, though, that Chicago Imagism, in its focus or its emphasis, was more on kind of a personal perspective, this sort of whimsical engagement, as opposed to kind of an ironic detachment that you'd see in New York pop. Now, the first group would have been the Harry Who, and the Harry Who centered around the School for the Art Institute of Chicago and also the Hyde Park Art Center, work getting a lot of attention. Now, the second wave after that, I think, was the false image group. Then you got into the nonplussed sum, kind of waves, differing somewhat in their stylistic concerns, but still common enough that a viewer could look at this overall grouping of artists from these three separate phases and say, yeah, there's a style here. I would say that probably the three that have broken into this kind of international fame, or at least countrywide fame, would be Ed Paschke, Jim Nutt, and Roger Brown. And I think, too, that they endure as particularly sharp or clear examples of the style. All the various aspects or elements seem to be present to a high degree with those three. References to popular culture, refined style, surreal juxtapositions, sometimes disturbing psychological content, those kinds of things. I think that Imagism was revolutionary in its time period, enduringly popular, enduringly interesting, and poised now for maybe for a rebirth of popularity. People that encounter this work that seems so directly arising from a non-art context or art, illustration more context, and then saying, like, what is this doing here, kind of? When it gets into this realm, it's bringing up these things that are visceral and bodily and unpleasant. And how are we supposed to view all this? So I think there's an enduring pushback, but also, like with any sort of revolutionary movement, eventually you get to the point where you say, well, it was also new and novel at the time, but it did bring up some interesting ideas that continue to bear fruit or yield options for exploration or discussion.